welcome to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Abraham Lincoln said, "You can fool all the people some of the time, some of the people all of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time." Lies, deception, corruption, scandals have been the hallmark of the current administration. What's troubling, however, is the fact that members in the Republican Party in the legislative body have joined the fray in order to deceive the Republican constituent, which represent a grave danger to our democracy. It is said that the biggest threat to any democracy is ignorance. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. It is, however, the ignorance of the ignorance which represent the greatest danger to society. It is what turns an ignorant man into a lunatic. Thus lies the danger, the peril even of a man, a community, a state, a country, yes, even a society. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Indeed, it does. We've seen it, have we not? We've witnessed it. We are all living it, are we not? All men are born ignorant. Many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. Only a few recognize ignorance is indeed the root and stem of all evil and choose to be ignorant no more. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. Question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered exclusively to you. You should stick around. It is enlightening, educational, and informative. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday.
And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Hello everyone, my name is Mike Duchenne, MD for short. We have a very special program. We will debate the danger that our democracy is under and also continue the conversation with race relation under the title War on Blacks. We have been talking about that for the longest, and of course it becomes almost something that you hear so often that you don't even pay attention to anymore, that our democracy has been under attack. Now, what makes it such a constant theme in the conversation that we have is the fact that there is a party, the Republican Party, which simply ignores, shrugs off, and hoping that everything just works fine. It wasn't said that way by the framers of the Constitution. It was such in such a way that the legislative body would do the job for which its members were elected in order to make certain that not only our system of democracy continue to strive, but also continue to evolve and continue to be improved. But for reasons that we already know, that the Republican Party, which was in control of all aspects of the government, decided to simply do absolutely nothing. But it's worse than that. In fact, a lot of the Republican legislators in Washington have chosen to work in tandem with the executive branch to continue to erode our democracy. Now, a number of pieces of news came out in the past few days, and of course that have alarmed a number of people, political party leaders, even financials, institution start feeling a little bit queasy about the whole aspect of what's been going on in Washington. Now, none of that should be of any surprise to anyone. In fact, if you recall that Donald Trump, the current president of the United States, had made a number of statements, has made a number of more that clearly tells you that Donald Trump will be exactly the type of person he displays today. So I'm not sure where the surprise comes. Now, for me personally, the surprise about the danger that the Republican represent for the country lie squarely at the feet of the Republican legislators in Washington. A couple of days ago, a few days ago, I wrote an article titled Ronald Reagan, a Hero which never was. Now, I'm not here to talk about Ronald Reagan, but the first paragraph of that article, I would like to use it in order to start the conversation about how much our democracy has been not only under attack, but also eroded by not just Donald Trump, but by the whole Republican Party. Now, I'm not personally concerned, overwhelmingly concerned about the constituent. And here's the reason. The framers of the Constitution know that we, the people, we have to use representation, meaning we have to elect senators, we have to pick congressmen to go to Washington to represent our views. So each state send 2 senators and a number of congressmen, depending on the size of the population and the size of the resident of that particular state. So those legislators, both congressmen and senators, their job is really to represent the view of their constituent, the constituent of their particular state. Now, we ought to talk about what has been going on, especially I would like at some point to address gerrymandering, which has been used by both parties, as a matter of fact, in order to erode our democracy. But we ought to talk about today about a more important aspect of it. You see, Republicans have always beat the drum of being members of a political party which stands for greatness, defenders of the republic, religious, and fiscally conservative. Now, this is an excerpt from the article that I just mentioned that I published a few days ago. In reality, those are words that Republican leaders most Republican constituents have never lived by. They've always spent, for instance, increase the national debt like drunk lovers. They provide support to corrupt individuals. They would sell the country to the highest bidder in a heartbeat, and their level of morality is nothing to be desired. In other words, their actions have never matched their words. You see, Abraham Lincoln said, "You can fool all the people some of the time, some of the people all of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time." Now, interestingly, the country is beginning to recognize the Republican leaders, the Republican legislature in Washington for who they really are. Now, a lot of people, a lot of conversation, a lot of individuals who have talked about the current administration have pointed finger to the fact that Donald Trump has made the Republican Party what it is today. Now, I completely disagree with that assessment. One thing that I know for a fact, that Donald Trump did not turn the Republican Party to what it is today. What Donald Trump has done, which is pretty obvious, is to expose the Republicans for who they really are. So Donald Trump could not possibly have turned the Republicans into what they are in a matter of a few months that he spent campaigning, because they first had to vote for him. In other words, they had to have a certain behavior in order to go along with an individual who show incompetence, who show no concern for the country, and yet those individuals went to the poll and voted for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump did not turn the Republicans into what they are today. What Donald Trump did, and he did it really pretty well, is to expose the Republicans for who they really are. And I know that all along because I talk about that. I published a number of articles about that. I had conversation, interviews with Republicans at that time during the presidential election as to why in the world someone in his or her right mind would support an individual who has no interest whatsoever in the country. At that time, I didn't even know that Donald Trump was even worse than what we have already found, that he has collaborating with a foreign entity. That information was not even available to me. Of course, we all seen Donald Trump on the podium calling on a foreign entity to meddle in our internal affairs. Most of us shrug that off as, well, Donald Trump being outrageous, Donald Trump just being Donald Trump. But put that aside, I knew ahead of time that Donald Trump was not the individual that should be president of the United States, because I didn't see any good in electing Donald Trump to the Oval Office. Now, today, a number of people, especially those who are concerned, those who actually love the country, those who don't just talk for the sake of talking, because saying that you're a patriot is easy for anyone to say. Those are just words. And that's what Republican leaders in general have been living by. They can say anything that they want. They're fiscally conservative. But look at how every time that they have the opportunity, they increase the national debt. This is not fiscally conservative individual. And yet, that's what they tell you. So we know that Republicans' words are worth absolutely nothing. The Bible says you will recognize them by the fruits that they produce. Now, an individual can say, I'm a Christian, but that doesn't make the individual a Christian. We will recognize that individual by the fruits. So their actions have never matched their words. Now we know, well, at least I know that we were heading in that direction. Now, to put it in perspective for you, I was probably the first individual who encouraged Donald Trump's candidacy for the presidency of the United States. In fact, the first article that I wrote encouraging that very idea was before the first presidential debate, which occurred in Las Vegas. If you remember, when they had almost 18 people debating. So it's not that I was always against the idea of Donald Trump bidding for the presidency of the United States, but I was at the forefront recognizing that Donald Trump is not good for the United States of America. Now, he has proven that beyond a reasonable doubt since he's been in the Oval Office. He has pushed away our allies, he has pushed away friends, and tried to cozy up to authoritarian, try to cozy up to dictators. Now, we have seen that Republican legislators whose job is to put a check on the executive branch have gone along with it as if it is okay. Now, thus lies the biggest problem that we have with our system of democracy, because we expected, and at the very least, the framers of the Constitution expected that at some point we may have a rogue executive branch. We may have a rogue president because the people may have elected the wrong person to the Oval Office. But the framers of the Constitution also believe that the legislative branch would put a check and prevent an executive branch from running amok. Boy, they were wrong, because they probably could not anticipate that there would be a full legislative body that control exclusively by one political party, and everybody in that political party would simply relinquish their duty, their patriotic duty, to make certain that the country doesn't go in the wrong direction. They could not possibly anticipate that, and that's exactly what we have. Now, I mentioned that I talk a lot about this particular predicament. Now, during the presidential election, I wrote a number of articles warning the country about the very aspect, the very possibility of having a Donald Trump presidency, because I knew that that was going to be what we currently have. In fact, here's what I wrote. I wrote an article under the title, and that article was written on May 30th, 2016. That's quite a few months before the election, the presidential, even before the primary were over. A case against Donald Trump for president. Now, mind you, that particular article, I wrote it after I published a number of articles that encouraged not only the presidency, the candidacy of Donald Trump for the presidency of the United States, also a number of articles where I defended the idea of refusing Donald Trump the nomination of the Republican Party. You may have not recalled that, but there was a time after Donald Trump clinched, according to the number of delegates that he was supposed to get. After he got those number of delegates, there were still conversation within the Republican Party to deny him the nomination. I was fully and completely against that idea, because the whole point of a system of democracy is to follow the rules, the principles, the guideline in order for that to work. Now, granted, to have denied Donald Trump the nomination would not have jeopardized our democracy, because this is just part of what a political party would decide how to go about doing its business. But nevertheless, that is the principle that they have followed for decades, and suddenly they would deny someone who has met the criteria. They would deny that person the nomination. So I went and defended Donald Trump, because Donald Trump met the criteria. He had a number of delegates necessary to be the nominee, so he should be the nominee, and I defended him. However, once that was over, as I mentioned, I could very easily see that now there is a different aspect of the issue that we as a nation had to attend to, which is to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president of the United States. So I wrote, which you can find on peoplebranch.org. That's People Branch, that's one word, peoplebranch.org. You will find the article that was written on May 30th, 2016, a case against Donald Trump for president. Now, there are a number of factors that I debated in that article, but here is the gist of the article. So what currently happening today is no surprise to me, because I talk about it, I debated it, I discussed it, I dissected it, and I presented the detail as to why I believe Donald Trump should not be president, because he will present a danger to our democracy. Now, here is in one sentence what I said about the possibility of voting Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States. In that article, I finish it that way. Say, Donald Trump is not worth the sacrifice of our nation. Donald Trump is not worth the sacrifice of our nation. Of course, at that time, all those individuals who were supporting Donald Trump figured out that I must have been crazy. I got all kind of names that you can imagine. But here is an excerpt of in this article. Said, patriotism is not just a word to toss around. It's not a cover to hide under. And Republicans have been very good at doing that, because they call themselves patriot. Of course, it's a word, but when it comes to the time for them to prove that they are patriot, they do something completely different. You see, patriotism requires making incredibly difficult choices, taking unconventional position for the sake of the country, for the sake of future generation, for the sake of the world. Now, there is one paragraph that I put in that article, and I said that there are damages, tragedies, devastation one can never recover from. And the Donald Trump prospect as the next president of the United States is one such instance. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a surprise. This is not a revelation for me. I seen it coming 1,000 miles away, and I wrote about it several times. That was one of 2 articles that I wrote about that very topic. In fact, that was part 1 that I wrote, and I even wrote a part 2 a month later called Donald Trump, a case against Donald Trump for president part 2, in which I bring back a few of those same points that I talked about in part 1. Now, to run a country is not an act. It cannot be scripted. You know, it was fun to watch Donald Trump during the primary. It was entertaining, outrageous, hilarious, ridiculous at times. Now, it is important. It is not just about the United States. It is not just about you. It is about the future. That is one excerpt that I just read from the article. And I completed this way. No logical individual can justify handing the fate of the nation, of the world even, in the hands of Donald Trump. Yes, you cannot be logical at that time, during the time that we were watching what we were watching, and say that we're going to hand Donald Trump the presidency of the United States. By the events that's been ongoing for the past few days, in fact, by the event that's been going for the past 2 years, I've been proven right over and over and over. Every time that Donald Trump has to do something, I've been proven right. But I take no comfort in the idea that I was right, because I know that Donald Trump could not be any different from what he was during the election to what he is today. This is not where I see the biggest problem for our democracy, because we know, well, I know ahead of time, this is where we were heading. But what I never anticipated is a complete surrender of the Republican Party to Donald Trump. The legislative body doesn't work for the executive branch. The executive body, the legislative branch is an equal branch of government to the executive branch. And the Republican in Washington simply turn over the task to do the job. Now, that's not politics. Now, in the news, they tend to debate that as if it is politics as usual. It is not politics. When the fate of a nation, when the system of government of a nation is on the balance, it becomes the task of every citizen to make certain that whoever is causing the danger to that system, that person is placed in check. In that very case, it is the President of the United States. And we have the tool to do that, the legislative branch. But what we saw is the legislative branch, fully controlled by the Republican Party, going along and helping to erode our democracy. And we're not talking about just them giving up, doing nothing. Quite a few of them, members, leaders in the Republican Party, actually have gone out of their way to actually undermine our democracy. Members, leaders. You have Devin Nunes, for instance. Devin Nunes is the chairman of who investigate of Congress. He is the chairman. Paul Ryan was House Speaker. Now we have a executive branch running amok, and you have those leaders. Now I use those, they weren't alone, but I use those as the example to show you that it wasn't just the executive branch that was doing what represent an undermining our democracy. Members of the Republican Party were working aggressively in collaboration with the executive branch to undermine our democracy. Now, if you are Republican, you probably think, great. But it is not great. The only reason people are leaving whatever country they come from, probably including your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents to come here to the United States, is because of our system of democracy. No, it's not great when you have members of the legislative branch undermining that democracy. So we cannot talk about a Republican Party whose members are patriots, because they can say they are, but their actions say just the opposite. Their action actually match what our enemy is doing, undermining our government. It is no different. We may not want to talk about that. We may see it being extreme to say that, but their actions, because when you have a member of the legislative branch, take Devin Nunes, for instance, whose job is to investigate matters that jeopardize our national security. Now, instead of doing that, he was collaborating with the executive branch, who is accused of doing so. Instead of doing the job, he was helping the executive branch getting out of that. So, yes, those individuals, those Republicans, and worse, the leaders of that party, they work to undermine our system of democracy. And those are the people that represent constituent in a state. Yes, the job that they do is as bad. Their action were as bad as what our enemies want to do, because it undermines our democracy. But what's even worse than our enemy, your enemy will always try to hurt you. But those individuals, those Republicans in Washington, they took an oath to protect our nation, which means they violated that oath in doing the kind of thing that they're doing. So that's why I see our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Not just because of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was foreseen and expected by the framers of the Constitution. That was expected, that at some point in the existence of this republic, we will have a president who is not concerned about the country, who is a rogue agent, foreign agent, a traitor. All that was foreseen. In fact, it is written on our Constitution. What was not foreseen is a whole political party who simply either do nothing, some of its members actually working against the country, and other members helping those working against the country. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not good for the United States of America. If you are concerned about your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, those individuals, those Republicans are as bad as our enemies, because their action, yes, it may sound outrageous, you may not want to admit it, but their actions do exactly the same thing, get to the same outcome as our enemy, because our enemy wants to undermine our democracy. our enemy want to destroy our government. What do those Republicans in Washington are doing? Exactly that. So it's not any different. Which means they doing the job our enemy wants to do, except that they're inside the country. And they put a cover. They are American. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. Race relations in America is one of the most important topics, and yet the least talked about. It is a topic that's avoided by all concerned parties. Blacks avoid talking about it because they get very emotional at some point if they have to talk about all the experience that they have to go through on a regular basis. Whites don't want to talk about it because that makes them feel, well, guilty of what blacks are subjected to. Well, and that's the reason we very rarely hear about it until some tragedy happens, at which point you can hear about it for a couple of days and then it disappears until the next tragedy. War on Blacks is the program to fill that void, because race relation is that difficult to talk about because, well, it's not black and white, no pun intended. It is a very complex issue. You see, there are two major groups of whites in the country. There are whites who are racist, who are prejudiced, and who discriminate. And it's a large group, millions of them. And on the other side, there are whites who are not racist, who do not discriminate. And it's also a large group. Now, it is very difficult to meet someone, a white individual, and determine that the person is racist or is not racist, because there is nothing white, no individual come with some sort of label that tells you this person is racist, this person is not. So in order to solve the problem, racism and discrimination in the country, we have to come to an understanding as to what causes it, where it came from, and why it is still a lingering problem in the country. Now, since I started this program a few days ago, I have had quite a few answers. Some are not good. people either discarding it altogether. There is no war on blacks. Some tell me that those things are not really happening anymore, and so on. Now, instead of answering to each and every comment that individual make about the presentation or about the issue altogether, racism, discrimination, I did propose that we're going to go back as far back as slavery and look at the evolution of those sentiments on both sides, both on the white side and on black side, and try to understand as to why we are still talking about it. Officially, 1865 was the end of slavery. I said officially, but that wasn't really the end of slavery as slavery is concerned. But that's the date we're going to be using in order to discuss whatever topic that has anything to do with slavery. So we're going to start at the time that it started. Here in America, it was 1619, the very first shipment of slaves in the land, Jamestown, Virginia. That was a British colony at that time, where 20 blacks were dropped there by ship. And we're going to look at that period all the way to 1865, when slavery was officially abolished by Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States. And we're going to look at that period during which time we look at the evolution of, we're not going to be, the only reason we talk about some detail of slavery is to make a point, but we're not here to talk about the period itself in terms of all the details that during that period, but rather what is of concern in terms of race relation. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. imagine for a second that someone come to your house. You don't know the person, you have no idea who that person is, come to your house and pretty much take you and your family hostage. Your first reaction is, of course, to fight back, because your job is to protect your family. So you want to fight back. But it's not always easy, because the individual or individuals, in the case of blacks, not only came with firepower, but they also had the upper hand of surprise. They may have done it at night while you were sleeping with your family, and then suddenly you wake up and here's in your house 4 or 5 people armed, while the others in the house tying you down. You, your wife, your kids. They don't speak your language, you don't speak their language. You have no idea why. And on top of that, they don't look like you. And they drag you out. And if you resist, they slap you, they beat you, they punch you, while your kids, small kids, young kids, crying, and they slap the kids as well in front of you, which you cannot do anything about. Imagine that for just a second. Now that's a bad picture, but in comparison to what blacks went through, that's a lovely picture. That's how they ripped them from their place, from their habitat, from where they know they live all their lives. Whites came, overpowered them, tortured them, chained them down like animals, and dragged them to put at the bottom of a boat for a journey that's going to last weeks. Some of them will not make it to America. And those who did, will again continue to be tortured, beaten, savagely. Now, the picture that I just described to you is not movies. Those are predicament that blacks, if you're black, your ancestors went through. Some of them died during the process. And those who survive will go through even worse. Now, if you're white, what I just described to you is what your ancestors did to blacks. And it's not even half of the story. Because when they came here, now you may try to disavow the whole thing about slavery, because the way that in general whites want to just shut down any conversation that clearly put the blames in their corner is by, I wasn't even born yet. We know you weren't born yet, because what we're describing to you happened between 1619 and 1960. Now, remember I mentioned that officially slavery ended in 1865 when Abraham Lincoln signed the executive order for the proclamation, the Emancipation Act. But we have record that slavery continued 100 years later here in America. 1960, we still have record of blacks who weren't aware that blacks were no longer slaves, and still the whites, those whites who call blacks criminals, who see them as being inferior, keep them as slaves. Now, that's not, I want to talk about this so that you can understand why blacks there were rebellions, because that's what we want to bring forth to the conversation, the rebellion. Because the picture I just described of you waking up in the middle of the night with several people in your house, take over, capture you, chain you, along with your family. Now, you would like to fight back, but you cannot, because first, you were taken by surprise, and second, you are chained down, tied down, and on top of that, those individuals that are doing that have firepower. So, no matter what you would think about doing, you cannot do, because the very next thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to just dragged and put on a boat for a journey that's going to last weeks. So you have no chance. You stand no chance whatsoever. Now, picture the following. When you get to the destination, and sometimes the destination is not a destination, is one of the destination. Meaning, for instance, the boat would stop. I'll take just an example. Stop in Virginia and drop a few blacks, and then go further down north, Maryland, maybe New Jersey, drop a few more and continue going down. Of course, most of those trades happen mostly in the South. So we might as well go further south, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and so on. So the boat is going further down the South and dropping blacks. And in the process of doing that, the family that we just talked about, you, your wife, your kids, now are being separated. Not because of you, but because those people who just overpower you decide that's the way it's going to be. So they drop your young kids in Virginia, because in Virginia, that was the demand there. They want young boy or young girls. And when they go further down in South, they drop your wife, because that's what they need, women. And then they continue going further down and they drop you and all the other blacks, because they need manpower to work in the farm. Now, you have no say over that. Now, you can say whatever you want about this predicament that I just mentioned to you, even if it were to be just that I just described to you. You would be enraged as a human being, you would do whatever it takes to go and not only to free yourself, but to go and try to reconnect with your families. If you watch Taken, that's a movie by Liam. When they took his daughter, who went to Paris with a friend, and someone came and kidnapped both. The only last chance he has is because the daughter called and he on the phone listening to all that happening. Now, in the movie, of course, it's a movie. He has skill to go back because he was special forces before, so he was stationed in Paris, so he knows the area, so he could go back. And you see what he did. He put everything on the line to go and get his daughter. Blacks did not get that kind of opportunity. First, they didn't have set of skill, and second, they were trained all the time that they were slaves. So which means they living a physical hell while they also mourning, grieving psychologically, emotionally, because they lost their wife, they lost their children, they have no way of reconnecting. And that also happened to the other members of the family. All that by whites, by your ancestors, because that was a means for your ancestors, if you are white, to enrich himself. Now, we cannot say that was, just, like it was the time that was going on. Of course, it was the time that cheap labor, because they only pay for the slave once and they don't have to take care of the slaves. In fact, they take very little care of the slaves who had to work 18 hours a day under scorching sun or the cold, not even properly dressed. Now, your ancestor, now I calculated that between 1619 to 1865, we had give and take at least 6 to 8 generations, which means we know you weren't born yet. Even your great grandpa could have been born at the end of close to the end of slavery, emancipation. So which means even if you go back to great grandpa, then you would find that maybe great grandpa, your great grandpa may have had some dealing with slavery, but it will be at the very end of the process. So we know you weren't born, but that doesn't make you not a concerned party if you are white, because you are a concerned party because of the fact that your ancestors inflict those type of torture on blacks ancestors, and the outcome is different for both sides, because your ancestors had slaves who spent their days, there was no off days, there was no break, working 18 hours, only have a few hours of sleep to go back in the field to work. And that wasn't all. if they show any sign of fatigue, they would be beaten until they bled. And that goes on and on and on. And while your ancestors, from the time that it started to the end, kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids, all of them went to school, went to college, get an education, has a head start on financial situation, because when they grew up with those things already available to them. They already know how to read, how to write books, how to do things. They had a profession and so on. In the meantime, on the other side, on the black side, they couldn't learn how to read. In fact, the masters, slave masters, prevented that from happening. And they go from also 6 to 8 generation where they had absolutely nothing. And even after slavery was abolished, they walk away with absolutely nothing. Now, Joe, in your camp, let's call Joe your great-great-great-grandfather. Joe walks away with land, with house, with a farm, with money, with business. Let's call Jack, the black who happened to survive beyond emancipation, now walks away with just the clothes on his back. And you tell me who's going to be doing much better in life? Your side already has education, job, profession, but that side has absolutely nothing. Has to start from zero. Yes, if you are white, you are as concerned, as responsible as your ancestors. No, you do not get a pass just because you weren't there, because you benefit of what your ancestors did. The blacks suffer of what his ancestors went through. Now, the reason that there were rebellions is because of the predicament that white slave owners, of the torture, the kind of horrific war that the slave owner were waging on blacks. Look at that guy. His name is Gordon. He's a former slave. You see his back? This is not painting. And this is not a rendering. This is lashes over a period of time. That's what you're looking at in his back. That picture was taken in Louisiana on April of 1963. He is a former slave. And that's what his back looked like. Now, he's lucky he survived. Not all blacks survived. Remember, I keep mentioning to you, blacks were beat until they bled. And that's what happened to Gordon. Beat until he bled. And before this even got healed, he got beat again. Guess why? He couldn't do anything to the master. He was chained. But expressed fatigue, slow down on the job. And you know how he was beat? They take both of his hands with his chest against the floor. Hot floor. Scorching sun. Both hands were pinned down. Both feet pinned down. And he was being lashed by the slave owners. Now, I know your family explained to you that your side of the family, if you are white, your side of the family was great people. They may even tell you that your grandpa or your great grandpa, however far back they went, was a good man. As I mentioned several times here, I have no doubt that he may be. He may have provided for his family, good husband, good father, but he was also a monster. That part they never pass down to you because it doesn't look good. So they only pass down to you a story that paint your ancestor as a good guy and the blacks as a bad guy. And that's the way it is even today. White, good, blacks, bad. Even today, because it is this type of environment that were created by whites, it's a tool that they use as a way to make certain that blacks continue to struggle in this country. First, they were slaves. They tortured them, but they call them criminal. They killed them for no reason, but they call them criminal. They beat them in horror. They starved them to death. So if they steal something to survive, they call them thieves. You see the problem? Those are label stigma that stay with blacks up to today. But they didn't start today. Start as slaves. They don't have anything. Remember that. They were slaves. Chained down, beat, tortured. As I mentioned before, some slave owners would even cut fingers and toes to make an example out of that slave and to instill fears on the other slaves. Not with anesthesia, by the way. Just put the hand down. Somebody would hold their hand and with a machete would cut the finger. Yes, the slave owners, that's your ancestor that painted to you as that nice guy, that good guy. Now, there were plenty reason for blacks to become rebellious. Just like you would try to do everything humanly possible for you to escape, to go and get your family back. Blacks were doing that. I read that some people, especially whites, they always say, why didn't they escape? Yes, it is very easy to sit on your laurel today because, yes, you weren't there. You don't know how this whole thing works. And then, yes, why didn't they escape? I even heard black people who have no idea of their history making statements that sometimes make you feel sad. That fool Kanye West a few months ago said slavery was a choice. It doesn't get any more ignorant than that. So they paint your ancestor as the good guy and blacks as the bad guys. And that picture lingers up to today. Your ancestor is the one that was beating. Well, let's back away for a moment. Your ancestor chased blacks in their own country, in their own habitat, in order to capture them and trade them as slaves. That already tells you that your ancestor was no good guy. There was nothing good about that. Now you could say those were merchants that went and chased those blacks, and then go to the went to those different states to sell them. In a sense, you would be right, because I'm certain that your ancestor may have not gone to Africa to chase and capture blacks. That's possibility. But they order blacks like merchandise. If I have this bottle of water I'm selling, unless I have people buying it, I cannot stay in that business. Because if I try every time that I go to Virginia, I try to sell blacks, they're not buying. I go to Georgia, I try to sell blacks, they're not buying. I go to Alabama, to Mississippi, guess what? It will stop, because nobody is buying. But that's not the case. Your ancestor actually asked for that. In fact, your ancestor maybe could have been involved in not just buying blacks, but also reselling blacks. So it was merchandise for your ancestor, business. They buy black, 10, 20, 30. They may not need that many, and they go and resell them at auction. So no, your ancestor, the story that you've been told about your ancestor being good guy, untrue, 100% false. But what makes the situation of racism and discrimination so bad even up to today, despite all the bad things, all the crimes that your ancestors committed, and yet they turn the table and say, well, it's blacks that are bad. And the reason the story lasted and continues is because whites were always in control of all those organizations. They're in control of business. They're in control of the police department. They're in control of the justice department. They're in control of the government. So whatever that they say, go, and this continues up to today. In fact, a few months ago, I show you Mitch McConnell trying to put on the federal bench an individual, Thomas Farr, who actually is a racist, who actually practiced racism in North Carolina publicly. This is not something that's not known. And yet Mitch McConnell wants to put that guy as federal judge. So those things are not things that it continues on. So the war on blacks is not a one side, a one aspect of it. It's at every level. People who are racist, people who discriminate, continue to do the same thing that makes certain that blacks continue to suffer casualties, be it physical, psychological, emotional, or financial. Now, I made a statement before that I would prefer to deal with the white nationalists than those who pretend not to be racist, not to discriminate, and yet their very actions are doing just that. Because the white nationalists, at the very least, I know where I would stand. Now, we know the problem is widespread in the country, because if it weren't, we wouldn't have the problem to begin with. Because to have a few white nationalists, that would not have done much to the problem. That would have not caused the problem in the country. But the problem is widespread. The Civil War happened in the United States of America. It's because there were millions of whites who wanted to keep slavery around. And there were millions of whites who wanted to end slavery. So the country has always been divided that way, that there are plenty, millions of whites who are racist, who discriminate, who are prejudiced. And as far as they're concerned, things should have been the way it was before. In fact, we heard it even from people bidding for the presidency of the United States. The latest one was Rick Santorum, who actually wanted to take the country back to what it was. I guess the war on black was so good for them, for their ancestors. Why not? Now, to give you a tip of what the rebellion did, we will talk about not in great detail, but we will mention a few details of the rebellion as to why today we're still talking about the racism, we're still talking about prejudice, we're still talking about discrimination. Again, I understand you weren't there. Even your great-great-great-grandpa may have not been involved in slavery. But what was passed to your great-great-great-grandpa, that was passed to great-great-grandpa, to great-grandpa, and to grandpa, and to you, is what makes the predicament we have today in the country still here, racism and discrimination, because that information, that sentiment, you grew up in a house where that story, the story that we will talk about during the detail of the rebellion, that story, you live it. It becomes part of your life, to the point that now when you see a black individual, you feel that that individual should die. Because your ancestor was good, the black slave were bad. That's the picture that they painted for you. Ancestor, good guy. Blacks, bad people. I wonder how that logic goes from one generation to the next. You go to someone's place, you capture the person with his family, you separate his family, sold them to different places, but you're a good guy. You beat those people until they bled, but you the good guy, they're the bad guy. You cut their fingers to teach them a lesson. You the good guy, they're the bad guy. You starve them to death. You the good guy, they're the bad guy for trying to steal something to eat. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Join me again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. for a continuation of race relation in America. In the meantime, if you have questions, you have suggestions, criticism, compliment, or even a way to improve what we're doing, do not hesitate to contact us. If you have other topics you would like to have us research and discuss on the Fourth Branch program, please do get in touch with us. We would like to hear from you. I strongly encourage you to follow me on Twitter so that you can receive invites, preview of our program and any other program that we have that could be of interest to you. And my handle is, of course, MDuchenney, MDuchenney. That's my Twitter handle. Or you can follow me on Facebook, Mike D. Michael, on Facebook, in which you will be able to not only see some of the past presentation, but you can also follow for future presentation. War on Blacks is a program which main purpose is to provide information that will help us understand why prejudice, discrimination, and racism still linger in the United States, and why in the process casualties on the Black side have been mounting. And it is time to understand where that problem originates and who is fueling the campaign to minimize the issue. I thank you for watching, and I hope you can be with me again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. when we continue this conversation. Good day. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.